I didn't think desperation had a smell. But sitting in that casting director's office, waiting for a man who had already decided, I realized it does. It smells like pressed clothes you ironed twice because you couldn't afford dry cleaning. It smells like rehearsed lines delivered to someone checking their phone. The casting director barely looked at me. He said, "Thank you. We'll call you," the way people say it when they mean the opposite. I walked out into the November cold and stood on the sidewalk for a full minute, not moving. 28 years old, 6 years of training, 4 years of nothing. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. Private dinner invitation. A restaurant address I recognized from the pages of a magazine I could never afford. I almost deleted it. Almost. Hey, if you're new here, welcome. And if you've been here before, welcome back. This channel tells stories that hit differently, the kind that stay with you. Drop in the comments where you're watching from. We genuinely love knowing. And if this is your first time, stick around. You might want to subscribe before this one's over. Hart arrived at the restaurant 7 minutes early because that was the habit of someone who had spent years auditioning. You arrive early. You read the room before anyone is watching. The man already seated at the corner table was not what she expected. Dorian Caldwell was 50 degrees of composed, the kind of composed that is not natural but practiced over decades until it becomes indistinguishable from natural. He stood when she entered. His suit cost more than her monthly rent. His smile arrived at exactly the right speed. "Miss Hart," he said, "I'm glad you came." She sat across from him and kept her hands still, which was something she had trained herself to do when she was nervous. He did not offer small talk. He placed a contract on the table with the flat precision of a man who had done this before. "I need someone with acting talent," he said. Nova looked at the contract without touching it. "For a film?" she asked. Dorian smiled in a way that did not reach his eyes. "For a performance." He turned a photograph face up between them without ceremony. She recognized the face. Alaric Mercer. Tech billionaire. 41 years old. A man whose name appeared in financial columns the way weather appears. Unavoidable. Discussed. Never fully understood. "You'll meet him," Dorian said. "You'll charm him. You'll make him fall in love with you." He leaned forward by exactly 2 inches. "And then you'll break his heart." He let that land. Publicly. Nova kept her face neutral. Inside, something she could not name shifted. "What does that mean exactly?" she asked. "A scandal," he said. "A scene. Cameras. One well-executed performance in front of the right people. His image collapses. His board loses confidence. His empire staggers." He picked up his wine glass. "You're an actress. Surely you understand the value of a final act." The number on the contract was $2 million. Nova read it twice. She was 3 months behind on rent. Her agent hadn't called in 6 weeks. The last callback she got was for a commercial that had already been cast by the time the email arrived. $2 million was the theater company she had sketched in a notebook at 19 and never told anyone about. $2 million was the ability to stop calculating. She looked up at Dorian. "Why me?" she asked. "Because you're good enough to be believed," he said, "and unknown enough that no one will question the story." He refilled her water glass. "You're not being asked to hurt anyone," he said. "He's a billionaire. He'll survive a bad headline." She said nothing for a long time. He let the silence do its work. She picked up the pen. She told herself she hesitated because she was being careful. But later, much later, she would understand that the hesitation was the only honest thing she did that entire evening. She signed. She spent 2 weeks preparing. She studied Alaric Mercer the way she studied a role, methodically, without sentiment. His schedule was not hard to find. Public appearances, foundation events, the charity gala circuit that men like him attended not out of generosity but visibility. She studied his photographs. He was always at a slight remove from the people around him in every picture. Present but not participating. Watching. She chose the gala carefully. She chose her dress carefully. She chose her entry point. A moment near the bar, a slight angle, a deliberate stumble. She ran the scene in her apartment mirror 40 times until the stumble looked accidental. Until her apology had the right weight. Until everything had the texture of something unrehearsed. The night of the gala, she stood outside the venue in the cold for 3 minutes and ran her lines. Then she walked inside. The gala was exactly as she expected, the particular performance of wealth that looks like generosity. $500 plates, foundation banners, photographers who made the whole room feel like a campaign. Nova moved through it with the practiced ease of someone accustomed to reading rooms. She found Alaric Mercer 20 minutes in. He was standing near the east wall, holding a glass of water, watching the room. Not mingling, not being networked at, which surprised her. Men at his level were usually surrounded. But there was something about the way he stood that discouraged approach. Not hostile, just complete, like a room that didn't need furniture. She adjusted her angle and made her move. The stumble was clean. The wine arc was precise. She gasped, just enough, and reached for a napkin that wasn't there. She looked up. He was already looking at her. Not at the wine on his jacket. At her. "I'm so sorry," Nova said. She deployed exactly the right amount of flustered. He looked at her for 2 seconds without speaking. Not annoyed. Not smiling. Just looking. "You're an actress," he said. It wasn't a question. Something slipped in her expression. She felt it before she could stop it. "How did you—" "Stage presence," he said. "It doesn't turn off." He took a dry cloth from the passing bartender without breaking eye contact. He handed it to her. Then he walked away. That was it. No name exchange. No follow-up question. No smile. He simply re-entered the room and was absorbed by it, leaving her standing at the edge of the bar holding his cloth, wine drying on his jacket, feeling something she did not have an immediate word for. She had run this scene 40 times. None of the versions ended with her feeling like the one who had been read. She called Dorian from the car on the way home. "First contact made," she said. "And?" he asked. "It'll take longer than one night," she said. Dorian's pause was brief. "That's fine. Take the time. Do it right." She said goodnight and ended the call. She sat in the back of the cab watching the city lights smear past the window. She thought about the way Alaric had looked at her. Not the look of a man being charmed. The look of a man recognizing something. She told herself it didn't matter. She told herself she had handled more difficult audiences. She told herself the contract was real, and the money was real, and the theater company was real, and feelings about a stranger's eyes were not. The cab crossed the bridge. The city fell behind her. She looked straight ahead. The second encounter happened on a Tuesday, 3 weeks later. Nova had mapped his routine with the patience of someone who understood that timing was everything. He visited the same coffee shop on 54th Street every Tuesday at 7:40 a.m. No assistant. No security visible. Just him, a corner table, and whatever he was reading on a tablet. She arrived at 7:35, ordered a black coffee she didn't want, chose a seat 2 tables away, and opened a book she had already read. He arrived exactly on time. He ordered without looking at the menu. He sat down and opened his tablet. For 22 minutes, nothing happened. Then he looked up, not at her specifically, just up, the way people do when a thought interrupts them. His eyes moved across the room and landed on her without urgency. She didn't look away fast enough. He held the eye contact for 1 second longer than a stranger would. Then he went back to his tablet. Her coffee had gone cold. The third time was an art gallery opening in Chelsea. Nova had confirmed through the Foundation's public calendar that Alaric was listed as an attendee. She wore something understated. She arrived alone and moved slowly through the exhibition, which featured large-format black and white photography, industrial structures, empty lots, the skeleton of things. She stopped in front of one piece longer than necessary. It was a photograph of an empty theater stage taken from the wings. One work light on. Dust suspended in the beam. She was genuinely still when he appeared beside her. "You've been here for 4 minutes," he said, not as an accusation. "It's a good photograph," she said. He looked at it. "It's lonely," he said. She turned to look at him. He was already moving on to the next piece. She stood there another moment. The word had landed somewhere she wasn't expecting. 6 weeks after the gala, Alaric invited her to dinner. Not through an assistant. He sent a text from a number she hadn't given him, which told her he had asked someone to find it, which told her more than the invitation itself. The restaurant was small. Italian. No dress code visible. No photographer waiting outside. He was already seated when she arrived, phone face down on the table. He turned it over when she sat. She noticed. They ordered. He did not perform small talk. He asked her about her first play, not her career, her first play. The specific one. She answered without thinking, and then noticed she was answering without thinking, and adjusted. But he had already heard the unguarded version. He didn't react to it visibly. He just listened and asked the next question. She had prepared 4 conversation pivots. She used none of them. The dinner lasted 3 hours. Dorian called 2 days after the dinner. "Progress?" he asked. "He's engaged," Nova said. "Moving at his own pace, but engaged." "Don't let him set the pace," Dorian said. "You set the pace. You control the timeline." "I know how to run a scene," she said. "This isn't a scene," Dorian said. "This is a man who has destroyed 3 people who underestimated him." A beat. "Don't underestimate him." She said she understood and ended the call. She was standing in her kitchen in yesterday's clothes, script pages on the counter she hadn't touched since the first dinner. She had meant to review her approach after the dinner. She hadn't. She'd gone home and sat on her couch and thought about what he'd said about her first play, the specific question, the way he'd asked it, the fact that nobody had ever asked that before. She picked up the script pages. She put them back down. The 4th and 5th meetings happened within a single week. A museum lecture on architecture she had confirmed he would attend. A foundation board dinner where she arrived as the guest of a publicist she had called in a favor from. Each time, Alaric treated her the same way. Present, unhurried, specific in his attention, not broad warmth but targeted. He remembered things. At the foundation dinner he asked how the callback had gone. She had mentioned it once, in passing, 3 weeks earlier. She had not gotten the callback. She told him so. He nodded without offering false comfort, which she appreciated more than she expected to. "The wrong room knows the wrong things about you sometimes," he said. She thought about that sentence for the next 2 days. She wrote it in the margin of her notebook, and then felt strange about having done it. 3 months in, Alaric asked her to walk with him after a gallery opening. No car, just the street, the cold, and the particular quiet of a city block at 9 p.m. between traffic waves. They walked 6 blocks without a destination. He asked her why she kept auditioning. She gave him the polished answer: discipline, craft, the long game. He listened without responding, which was his way of saying he wasn't finished with the question. She tried again. "Because acting is the only time I feel real," she said. The honest version. The one she hadn't planned on giving. He was quiet for half a block. "Then don't stop," he said. 2 words. No follow-up. No layered compliment built around it. She walked beside him and felt the sentence settle into her chest like something heavy being set down gently. She had been paid to make this man feel something. And she was the one standing on a November sidewalk trying to remember how to breathe normally. She met Alaric Mercer on a Sunday. It was not planned. Nova had arrived early to a brunch Alaric had suggested, and Imani was already there, Alaric's younger sister, 33, with the kind of directness that announces itself before the handshake. "You're Nova," Imani said, looking at her with open assessment. "He mentioned you." Nova smiled. "Good things, I hope." Imani picked up her coffee cup. "He mentioned you at all," she said. "Which is the thing." She said it without malice, but it landed precisely. Alaric arrived 8 minutes later. He moved between them without visible concern, comfortable with both, performing for neither. But Nova watched Imani watch her for the rest of the meal. Not hostile, not warm. The careful, measuring attention of someone who loves a person and has decided to take their time deciding whether a new variable is safe. Nova understood it completely. It made her feel worse. That night, Nova sat at her desk and opened her laptop. She pulled up the original contract document Dorian had emailed her. She read through it for the first time since she had signed it. The terms were clean. The timeline was clear. Public event, public accusation, documented humiliation, full payment on delivery. She closed the laptop. She looked at the wall. She thought about Imani's eyes at brunch. She thought about the way Alaric had said, "Don't stop," not as encouragement but as instruction. Like someone who had decided she was worth the directive. She opened her phone and looked at Dorian's last message. "Timeline check. Are we on schedule?" She typed, "Yes." She sent it. She set the phone face down on the desk. She did not sleep well that night, and in the morning, she told herself it was the coffee. For months in, something shifted. Not dramatically. Not in a single moment she could point to later and say, "There, that was it." It happened the way water erodes stone. Gradually, then completely. Alaric had started calling her on Tuesday evenings. Not to make plans, just to talk. He would ask about her day the way someone asks who actually intends to listen to the answer. She would tell him about auditions, about the theater company she was slowly building in her head, about the director whose workshop she had been sitting in on. He listened without filling silences unnecessarily, without offering solutions she hadn't asked for, without making her feel like her life was small because his was large. One Tuesday, he told her about a building his company had designed software for, an archive in Iceland, and the way he described the cold light through the structure. She understood that this man had an interior life he almost never showed anyone. She was being let in. And the terrible part was that she wanted to be. Dorian requested a sit-down at the end of month 4. Same restaurant. Same corner table. He looked at her across the linen and asked for a progress report with the patient precision of a man reviewing a quarterly return. She gave him what he needed. Alaric was engaged. Trust was established. The relationship had the depth required to make a public betrayal land. Dorian nodded slowly. "We'll need 6 more weeks," he said. "The Foundation's annual gala is the right venue. 500 guests. Press access. Board members in the room. One scene. Well executed. Maximum damage." He pushed a folder across the table. Inside were logistics, the event layout, the segment of the program she would exploit, the specific accusations most likely to trigger board reaction. She looked at the folder without opening it fully. 6 weeks, she said. 6 weeks, he confirmed. She took the folder. She told herself she was still in control of this. The following Saturday, Alaric took her to a small private screening of a documentary about theater restoration. He had found it through a notice in a publication she had mentioned once, 3 months earlier. He had remembered. He hadn't mentioned he remembered. He just arranged it. The theater was a converted warehouse in Brooklyn, 40 seats, radiators that knocked against the silence. They sat side by side in the dark and watched footage of craftsmen rebuilding a collapsed stage in rural Portugal. At one point, a woman on screen, one of the restoration workers, pressed her hand flat against the newly laid boards and closed her eyes. Nova felt something move through her chest. She kept her eyes on the screen. Alaric said nothing. But at some point in the second half, she became aware that he had turned his head and was looking at her instead of the film. She didn't turn to meet it, but she felt it. The weight of being watched by someone who is not waiting for a performance. Subscribe for a minute. Seriously, just 1 minute. If this story is pulling you in, hit subscribe so you don't miss what's coming. It only takes a second, and it means everything to this channel. She called Dorian that night from outside the warehouse before she got in the car. She told him it was going well. He asked if she needed anything. She said no. She ended the call and stood in the Brooklyn cold. She thought about the folder in her apartment. 6 weeks. She had read the accusations Dorian had prepared. Fabricated claims about financial manipulation, emotional coercion, a manufactured paper trail that would read as credible in a headline. All of it designed to look like a woman speaking truth to power. None of it true. She thought about Alaric sitting in that screening room. The way he had not asked anything of her all evening. The way he had simply brought her somewhere she would want to be, and then existed beside her without agenda. She got in the car. She looked out the window, the whole ride home. She did not open the folder when she got in. She put it in the desk drawer and pushed it to the back. Imani found her alone at a Foundation preview event 2 weeks later. Alaric had stepped away to speak with a board member. Imani appeared beside Nova at the drinks table with the quiet deliberateness of someone who had been waiting for exactly this opening. "He doesn't do this," Imani said, without preamble. Nova looked at her. "Do what?" "Bring people in," Imani said. "He has an orbit, colleagues, staff, people who serve a function. You're not in any of those categories." She picked up a glass. "Which means you're in a category he hasn't used in a very long time." Nova held eye contact and said nothing. "I'm not warning you off," Imani said. "I'm telling you what it means. Because I don't think he'd tell you himself." She looked at Nova steadily. "He doesn't know how to do this halfway," she said. "So whatever this is, make sure you know what you're doing." She moved away before Alaric returned. Nova stood at the drinks table and felt the words arrange themselves inside her like furniture being moved. That night Nova sat in her apartment and made a list. Not a dramatic list. A practical one. On one side, The contract, the money, the theater company, the exit from the version of her life that was slowly killing her ambition. On the other side, a man who had listened to her on a Tuesday evening describe a rehearsal that went badly and responded not with comfort, but with a single question: "What did you learn from it?" A man who had remembered a documentary from a passing reference 3 months prior. A man who, according to his own sister, did not know how to do this halfway. She looked at both sides of the list. The money was real. The theater company was real. But so was the look on his face in that Brooklyn screening room. She folded the paper. She didn't throw it away. She pressed it flat and put it in the back of the same drawer as the folder. She sat at her desk until midnight, doing nothing in particular. 5 weeks before the gala, Alaric told her about his father. They were in his apartment. She had been there twice before. Sitting in the large front room after dinner, the city arranged below them through the floor-to-ceiling windows. He didn't lead into it. He simply said, "My father was brilliant and absent in equal measure. He built things and ignored people. I spent a long time trying not to become that." He said it the way someone says something they have thought about 1,000 times and are saying out loud for the first time. She asked if he thought he had succeeded. He was quiet for a moment. "I built the empire," he said. "I'm still working on the other part." He didn't look at her when he said it. He looked at the city. She sat beside him and understood that she had just been given something he did not give easily. Her chest felt like a fist opening. She thought about the folder in her desk drawer. She thought about 6 weeks. She looked at the city and said nothing, and hated herself quietly and completely. She called Dorian the next morning, not to report progress. She wasn't entirely sure why she called. She told him the timeline was on track. She told him the gala was confirmed. She told him she understood the logistics. Dorian listened and then said, "You sound different." She said she was tired. "Don't get tired now," he said. "This is the part that requires the most precision." "I know," she said. He paused. "Nova," he said. "The money transfers on delivery. Not before. Not almost. On delivery." She understood what he was not saying. He was reminding her that sentiment was not a line item in the contract. She said she understood. She ended the call. She stood at her kitchen window, looking at the gray February sky. She had 6 weeks. She had a man who had told her about his father. She had a folder in a desk drawer. She had a version of herself she wasn't sure she recognized anymore. She made coffee. She drank it standing up. She did not look at the desk. 3 weeks before the gala, Nova made a mistake. Not a strategic one, a human one. She let Alaric see her without the performance. It happened without planning. She had come from a callback that went badly. Not just didn't get the part badly, but the director had stopped her mid-monologue and said, "You're pushing. Stop pushing." And she had walked out onto the street feeling scraped hollow. She met Alaric for dinner that evening anyway, because canceling would have required an explanation she didn't have the energy to manufacture. She arrived late. She sat down. He looked at her and asked nothing. Just waited. And something about the waiting, the total absence of demand, broke something loose. She told him what happened. The full version. Not the edited, composed version she would have given anyone else. The one about standing in that audition room, feeling like a fraud in the only thing she had ever truly wanted to do. When she finished, Alaric was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "That director was describing himself, not you." She looked at him. "People who push tell others to stop pushing," he said. "It's the most reliable thing about them." She sat with that. It did not fix anything, but it landed exactly where she needed something to land. The morning after that dinner, she opened the desk drawer. She took out the folder. She took out the folded list. She sat with both of them on the desk in front of her for a long time. She thought about what delivering on the contract actually looked like. The specific mechanics of it. Standing at a microphone. Cameras recording. Fabricated accusations delivered in front of a room full of people who would believe them because she was good at being believed. Alaric's face when it happened. She had avoided thinking about his face until now. She let herself think about it. The stillness in his eyes at the gala when he had first seen through her stage stumble. The patience of him. The way he had told her, without sentimentality, not to stop. She closed the folder. She did not put it back in the drawer. She put it on the kitchen counter. She wasn't sure what that meant, but it felt like she was done pretending she hadn't made a decision. She met Imani for coffee. Imani had texted her, not Alaric's doing, her own initiative. They met at a place in the West Village that Imani had chosen. For the first 20 minutes they talked about nothing consequential. Then Imani set down her cup and said, "He told me about the conversation at the apartment." Nova kept her expression even. "Which part?" she asked. "The part about your father," Imani said. "Except he said your father." A pause. "He was talking about himself," Imani said. "He does that sometimes. Uses other people as proxies when something is too close. He hasn't done that with someone outside the family in a long time." Nova looked at her coffee. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. Imani was direct. "Because whatever you're carrying," she said, "you should decide what to do with it before it decides for you." She picked her cup back up. "That's all," she said. The rest of the coffee was ordinary. But Nova drove home with Imani's words occupying the entire space of the car. 2 weeks before the gala, Dorian called with a change. He had arranged for a specific journalist to be credentialed at the event. Someone who would have a story ready to file within minutes of the scene. He gave her the journalist's name. He told her the accusations needed to be delivered at the donor recognition segment. The moment would be on the main feed. He confirmed the payment logistics. He spoke with the clean efficiency of someone who had never considered an alternative outcome. She listened. She said yes at the appropriate moments. She ended the call. She stood in her living room and looked at the wall. She thought, there is now a journalist. A credentialed journalist who would be in that room with a story pre-written. The weight of the plan had always been abstract. Now it had a specific name, a specific filing deadline, a specific face that would appear in tomorrow's news cycle carrying Alaric Mercer's name in a headline that was not true. Her hands were not shaking. She noticed them not shaking and found that somehow worse. 1 week before the gala, Alaric asked her to come with him to visit the site of a new foundation project. A community art space in the South Bronx, still under construction. They walked the space with the project director. Exposed beams, concrete floors, the ghost of what it would become visible in the scaffolding. Alaric listened more than he spoke. He asked the kind of questions that showed he had read the brief thoroughly and thought about it past the document. At one point the project director pointed to a corner of the main room and described how it would be configured as a small black box theater. Affordable rate. Community access. No audition required to use the space. Nova stood in that corner and looked at the dimensions. She thought about being 19 and drawing theater floor plans in a notebook. She didn't say anything. But Alaric, who was across the room, looked at her at that exact moment. He held it for a second. Then he looked back at the project director. He had seen her. He had always seen her. That was the problem. That night she sat on her bathroom floor. Not dramatically. She had simply been washing her face, and then sat down because standing felt like more than she had. She thought about everything she knew about Alaric Mercer at this point. Not the public version. The actual man. The one who called on Tuesdays. Who remembered things. Who used proxy language when something was too close. Who had looked at her in a construction site the way people look at something they recognize but cannot name. She thought about the journalist. The pre-written story. The credentialed press pass. She thought about $2 million. She thought about the theater company. She thought about the folder on the kitchen counter. She picked herself up off the bathroom floor. She walked to the kitchen. She picked up the folder. She opened it for the first time since Dorian had given it to her and read every page. Every fabricated claim. Every manufactured detail. She read it the way you read something you are trying to find a version of yourself in. She couldn't find her. 4 days before the gala, she went to see Alaric. No invitation. She showed up. He opened the door and looked at her with mild surprise, the closest thing to surprise she had ever seen from him, and stepped aside without asking why. She came in. She did not sit down. She stood in the center of his living room and looked at the city through the windows for a long moment. "I need to tell you something," she said. He waited. She turned to face him, and then she could not do it. Not because she didn't want to. Because she looked at his face, the contained patience of it, the absolute lack of armor, and understood that what she was about to do would not be a confession. It would be the scene. It would be the performance Dorian had hired her for, just redirected. She could not tell the truth without it being its own kind of act. She stood there for a full 10 seconds. "I wanted to see you," she said finally. It was the truest thing she had managed in months. He looked at her for a moment. "Okay," he said simply. He went to make tea. She sat down on the couch and stared at the city. The night before the gala, Dorian sent a final message. "Confirmed. All elements in place. See you tomorrow." She read it at 11 p.m. sitting on her bed, still dressed. She thought about calling him. She thought about what she would say. She thought about calling Alaric. She thought about what she would say. She thought about the project director in the Bronx describing the black box theater. She thought about Alaric saying don't stop. She thought about Imani saying it decides for you. She thought about the version of herself that had signed the contract. She thought about the version that had sat in a Brooklyn screening room trying not to look moved. She thought about the version on the bathroom floor. She put her phone down. She lay back on the bed fully dressed and looked at the ceiling. Tomorrow was set. The venue was arranged. The journalist was credentialed. The script existed. What did not yet exist was her decision about whether she would deliver it. She closed her eyes. She did not sleep. Morning came anyway. The morning of the gala arrived the way significant days always do. Ordinary. Gray light through the window. A cab honking on the street below. The refrigerator humming. Nova had not slept. She had watched the room change from dark to dim to the flat white of a February morning, and she had made no decision. And now it was 7 a.m., and the gala was 14 hours away. She got up. She showered. She made coffee. She stood at the kitchen counter and looked at the folder. She had left it open the night before. The fabricated accusations stared back at her from the page. She closed it. She picked up her phone and looked at Dorian's message again. All elements in place. She looked at Alaric's last text below it, sent 2 days ago. Saturday. I'll have a car sent. 2 texts from 2 men. One who had bought her. One who had simply shown up. She set the phone down. She got dressed. She did not open the folder again. By midday, she had done everything that needed doing. Hair. Makeup. The dress she had chosen 3 weeks ago. Understated, credible, the kind worn by a woman about to say something true. She had chosen it for the performance. Now she stood in front of the mirror and could not separate the woman wearing it from the woman who had sat on a bathroom floor and could not find herself in the contract pages. Her phone showed 3 messages from Dorian across the afternoon. Logistics confirmations. Journalist positioned at table 7. Segment begins at 9:15. She answered each one with a single word. Understood. She sat at the edge of the bed. She thought about the specific moment it would happen. The microphone. The camera swiveling. 500 faces. Alaric in the crowd. She had played that scene in her head hundreds of times. Every version had the same shape until 4 days ago. Now when she played it, she could not get past his face. The contained patience of it. The total absence of armor. She stood up. She picked up her bag. She walked out. The gala was exactly as Dorian had designed it to be. Vast. Lit for cameras. The kind of room where everything that happened would be witnessed and documented before it was understood. Nova arrived in the car Alaric had sent. She moved through the entrance, through the greeting line, through the first hour of the event with the automatic competence of someone managing themselves from a distance. She saw Dorian across the room at 40 minutes in. He caught her eye. He gave her a single nod. She looked away. She found Alaric near the east wall, the same position he had occupied at the first gala, months ago, when she had studied his habits and chosen her angle of approach. He was standing with the same quiet self-containment, but this time when he saw her he moved toward her. Not across the room, just toward, closing the distance without urgency. He said her name when he reached her. Just her name, the way someone says a word they're used to saying. She smiled. She held it together. She had 14 minutes before the donor recognition segment. They stood together for 12 of those 14 minutes. He asked about the workshop she had mentioned the previous week. She answered. She asked about the foundation project in the Bronx. He answered. It was the conversation of 2 people who had learned each other's vocabulary. At one point he touched her arm, briefly, just at the elbow, to redirect her attention toward something the foundation director was saying across the group. The touch lasted 2 seconds. She felt it for the remaining 12 minutes. At 9:13, the program director caught her eye and gestured toward the stage. Her cue. She excused herself from the group naturally. Alaric watched her go with the same open expression he always had, present, undemanding. She walked toward the stage. She passed table 7. She did not look at the journalist. She climbed the 3 steps to the podium. She looked out at the room. 500 faces arranged in the lit dark. She found Dorian at the back. She found Alaric in the crowd. She gripped the edges of the podium. She opened her mouth. The words Dorian had prepared did not come. She stood at the microphone and felt the whole room waiting. Cameras live, journalists' pen ready. Dorian at the back with the stillness of a man watching his investment mature. The script was there. She knew it completely, every word sequenced, and waited for maximum damage. She had run it so many times it had grooves. She opened her mouth. She looked at Alaric. He was watching her with an expression she had not seen before. Not anticipation. Not warmth. Something patient and specific. The look of someone who already knows how a scene ends and is watching to see how the actor finds their way to it. Her throat closed around the first fabricated sentence. She stood there for 3 full seconds in total silence. 500 people and not a sound. Then she said the only thing that came. "I'm sorry." Into the microphone. To the room. To no one. To him. The murmur that moved through the crowd was confused and immediate. She stepped back from the podium, and Alaric Mercer walked onto the stage. He took the microphone without ceremony. He looked at the room once. Then he looked at Nova. "I think it's time everyone knew the truth," he said. The room went fully silent. He spoke clearly, without theater, the way he did everything. He had known about the plan from the beginning. Dorian had approached other actresses before Nova. He had hired investigators the moment the scheme was identified. He had chosen her specifically, not to dismantle her, but because she was the only candidate who had hesitated before signing. He said it plainly, like a man reading a well-documented record. Nova stood 3 feet behind him on the stage and felt the entire architecture of the last 5 months rearrange itself. Every dinner, every Tuesday call, every moment she had believed she was running the scene. He had known. He had always known. And he had let her in anyway. She looked at his profile as he spoke and felt something she did not have a clean name for settle through her like a temperature change. Dorian Caldwell was arrested at 9:47. Nova watched it from the edge of the stage. 2 federal investigators, who had been seated as guests, moved through the crowd with the unhurried efficiency of people executing a plan that had been rehearsed more thoroughly than anything she had prepared. Dorian saw them coming. He did not run. He straightened his jacket. He looked across the room at Alaric. Then he was gone, through a side corridor, 2 investigators beside him, the door closing behind the whole scene as if it had been a brief interruption. The room erupted. Not panic. The particular electric noise of 500 people processing something simultaneously. Nova stood on the stage steps and watched the door. She thought about the contract. The $2 million she would never see. The theater company that would remain a floor plan in a notebook. She waited for the grief of it. What came instead was something quieter. Something that felt uncomfortably like relief. Later, much later, when the guests had thinned and the camera crews had filed out and the room had been reduced to staff and the soft clatter of breakdown, Nova found Alaric on the terrace. He stood with his back to the door, looking at the city. Glass of water in his hand. No jacket. She stepped outside. The cold hit immediately. She did not go back for her coat. She walked to the railing and stood beside him. Neither spoke for a moment. The city below was indifferent and luminous and going about its business. She said, "You used me." Her voice was even. "Yes," he said. He did not qualify it. She had expected him to. She looked at his profile. "Was any of it real?" she asked. He turned then. He looked at her directly. "Which part are you asking about?" he said. She held his gaze. "All of it," she said. He was quiet long enough that the city noise filled the space between them. Then he spoke. "At first," Alaric said, "no." He said it without flinching. "You were a variable inside a larger calculation. A way to confirm what I already suspected about Dorian. I expected you to go through with it. I built everything so that if you did, the outcome I needed would still be achieved." Nova listened. She did not interrupt. "But somewhere between the calculation and the result," he said, "something changed that I hadn't accounted for." He looked back at the city briefly, then back at her. "You." She stood at the railing and let the word land. Not the romantic weight of it, the specific weight. The weight of being told by a precise and unsentimental man that you had become an unaccounted variable in his architecture. "That's not a declaration," she said quietly. "No," he agreed. "It's the truth." She turned and looked at the city. The cold moved through the gap between them. "I forgot I was supposed to be running a scene on you," she said. "I know," he said. "When?" she asked. "The documentary," he said. "The way you looked at that stage on the screen." She said nothing. He said nothing. The city absorbed the silence. She asked the question she had been carrying since the stage. Why tell the room? He considered it. Because Dorian needed witnesses, he said. The arrest required a documented public record. The gala was the most efficient venue. She looked at him. "That's the legal answer," she said. He was quiet for a moment. "You were about to do something you couldn't come back from," he said. "I didn't want you to have to live with it." She absorbed that. She turned it over. She looked for the calculation in it and found something adjacent to calculation but not identical. "You could have just arrested him quietly," she said. "Yes," he said. "Why didn't you?" He looked at her for a long moment. "Because you were standing at that microphone," he said. "And I needed you to know that you didn't have to." She pressed her lips together. She looked away. She was not going to cry in front of this man on a terrace. She had made worse decisions in worse circumstances and maintained her composure. She maintained it now, but only barely. She left the terrace before he did. She went back through the ballroom, empty now except for the staff folding linen, and retrieved her coat and her bag from the coat check. She stood in the lobby for a moment. She thought about calling Imani. She thought about calling no one. She walked outside. The February cold was absolute and clarifying. She did not call for a car. She walked, not in any particular direction. Just movement against the cold, the city indifferent on all sides. She walked 6 blocks before she understood what she was feeling. It was not relief. It was not grief. It was not the clean resolution she had associated with final acts. That particular silence when the last line has been delivered and the stage goes dark. What she felt was something unfinished. Not badly unfinished. Unfinished the way a room looks when someone has just moved in and the furniture is positioned but nothing is hung on the walls yet. Possibility without certainty. She walked 2 more blocks. She went home. The next 3 weeks were a specific kind of strange. Dorian Caldwell's arrest was in every financial publication by the following morning. The story carried the details Alaric had made public. 3 years of corporate sabotage, securities manipulation, a conspiracy that had been quietly documented for months. Nova's name appeared in 2 early reports as an unnamed associate. It disappeared from the coverage within 48 hours. Alaric's team had managed it. She did not thank him for that. She was not sure how to occupy the space where gratitude and complicated things lived simultaneously. She went back to her life. Auditions. The workshop. The theater company that remained a floor plan in a notebook. She saw Alaric once in those 3 weeks, briefly, at a foundation event she nearly didn't attend. They spoke for 7 minutes. He was not different. He was exactly the same as he always was, which should have made it easier. It did not make it easier. 6 weeks after the gala, she got the call. The artistic director of a mid-size off-Broadway theater. A principal role. A production called The Space Between Lines. Rehearsals in 4 weeks. Opening night in 3 months. She sat in her apartment for a full hour after the call ended, not moving. She had not applied for this production. She had not auditioned for it. She asked the artistic director how her name had come up. He told her a private donor had reached out to the theater 6 weeks ago. Before the gala. Before all of it. The donor had attended a reading she had done the previous year. A small showcase, 40 people, a theater above a bar in the East Village. The donor had recommended her specifically for the lead. She sat with that information. She knew without asking who the donor was. She thought about calling Alaric to tell him she knew. She thought about what she would say after that. She could not find the sentence. She accepted the role instead. She started rehearsals 4 weeks later. Rehearsals were the first clean thing in months. The director was precise and patient. The script was demanding in the ways that good scripts are. It required her to locate things she had been keeping in storage. She found herself staying late in the rehearsal space after the other cast had gone, running lines to the empty chairs, working a single transition again and again until it stopped being technique and started being true. One evening the director sat in the back row after everyone had left and watched her run the final monologue for the 4th time. When she finished, he said, There it is. She looked up. Whatever you've been holding, he said. You're finally putting it in the work. She nodded. She understood what he meant. She had spent months performing in the wrong theater, rehearsing the wrong role for the wrong audience. What she had in this room was the real work. And the real work, it turned out, was the thing she had told Alaric the truth about on a November sidewalk. The only time she felt real. She stayed another hour. Opening night arrived on a Thursday in May. The house was full, 212 seats. She stood in the wings, listening to the audience settle, the particular sound of a room becoming an audience, individual conversations softening into collective attention. She thought about everything that had preceded this moment, not as a montage. Specifically, the casting director who hadn't looked at her resume, the contract on the linen tablecloth, the first gala, and a man who saw through a stage stumble in under 10 seconds. 41 Tuesday phone calls, a documentary in Brooklyn, a folder in a desk drawer, a microphone she could not deliver her lines into, a terrace in a city, and the specific truth of two people who had both been running scenes on each other and had both, at separate moments, forgotten to. The stage manager's voice in her earpiece. 30 seconds. She rolled her shoulders back. She walked into the light. For 90 minutes she was completely and entirely real. The applause at the end started in one person and spread before it could be decided. She stood at the front of the stage and let it reach her. She stepped out the stage door afterward into the May night. Coat over her costume. The city warm for the first time in months. The small crowd of theatergoers on the sidewalk parting around her as she moved through. She stopped. Across the street, under a streetlight, hands in his coat pockets. Alaric. No security. No car visible. No assistant. Just him, standing the way he always stood, complete, unhurried, taking up exactly the space he occupied and no more. She crossed the street. She stopped in front of him. She looked at him for a moment without saying anything. Was this part of the plan? She asked. He smiled. The real one. The one that arrived slowly. No, he said. He held her gaze. For once, he said. I'm improvising. She laughed. Not a performed laugh. Not the calibrated warmth she had learned to deploy in rooms. The real one, quick and unannounced and entirely hers. It disappeared into the city noise, and it didn't matter because it had not been for an audience. She looked at him standing under that streetlight. She thought, neither of us are performing right now. She had not been able to say that about any moment in a very long time. She stepped toward him. The city went on around them, indifferent and luminous and completely uninterested in what had just begun. She was hired to break his heart. He knew the plan all along. But the thing neither of them planned for was the part where the lies ran out and they were still standing there. If this story stayed with you, subscribe, like this video, so more people find it. Drop a comment and tell us what hit hardest. Share it with someone who needs a story that doesn't let go. We'll be here. We always are. Don't miss what comes next.